Alrighty, so now we're moving on to the next problem. It says a graph of a linear inequality in two variables is shown on the right. Write a linear inequality that can be used to represent this graph. So the first thing I want to focus on is obviously the graph, right? We have a graph here, and on this graph you see that it traverses specific areas. It traverses this one at the 1 on the x-axis and this one at the 2. So that will help us determine what our slope is, and then it also helps us determine what we already see here, which is our y-intercept. Now it says help on here. After inequality it says, on the help it says y parentheses, and then it says here we have less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, or less than. That means it wants the inequality having one of these on there, and then mx plus b. So it's in slope-intercept form. We just have to write the inequality in slope-intercept form, which we can easily do just by looking at this equation right here. So if we wanted to, we can grab these 2 points, plug them into Desmos, and then figure out on a table what the equation would be by doing the y1 worm. But for now, we're going to do these 2 parts right here. So the first point I see here is this one, which is at 2, and since it's in our y-axis, that tells me that this is our y-intercept. So I automatically know that our b is equal to 2. Now if I wanted to figure out what my slope was, I can count my rise over run. Rise over run. Alright, so let's do our rise over run. We're first going to check here. We're going to go down 1, 2, okay? So that goes down 2, so negative 2 over, and then how much are we going to the right? We're going 1 to the right. 1 to the right there. Okay, which means that let's put an m equals on this one right here. We have m equals negative 2 over 1, meaning that our m is equal to negative 2. Both ways is fine. Obviously this looks a little better than having negative 2 over 1, but having it in a fraction tells us when we go our down and then to our right. As opposed to here, it's a little harder to recognize that we're going to be going to the right at some point. But keep in mind, both of these right here are the exact same thing, and they both help you figure out. So now we know, if we move over here, that our y, and then we can put our, we know it's supposed to be mx plus b, so we can skip ahead and leave a gap right here. We're going to leave a gap. We're going to leave a gap. This is not anything other than a gap. I'm even going to make it into a box, actually. Okay, so y something is m, meaning negative 2, x, and then it says here that we have a positive y-intercept, so we're just going to put plus 2. Okay, so now we figured out most of the equation. The only thing we haven't figured out yet is what is shaded into this region. And for that, we can know one of 2 things. If y is less than the equation, the mx plus b part, we know we're going to be filling in under. And if y is greater than, we would be filling in the top. But if we're not even sure about that, we could always use Desmos to help show us exactly what's happening. So let's bring Desmos back out here. So if we bring Desmos and we type in the equation y, and for starters we're going to put a greater than. Let's just put a greater than because we wanted to try that one out. So negative 2x plus 2. Okay? And something that I should have mentioned a little earlier, you always want to start off Desmos by going to the little wrench and then making sure that your step is by 1 and your other step is by 1, and making sure that your minor grid lines are taken off. That way it doesn't get confusing. And now we can see our proper line right here. Do you see how it starts? It intercepts the y-axis at 2, and it intercepts the x-axis as 1, just like the other one did. So that looks good. That means that we have the exact same line. And if it was y is greater than, we would have it filled in. It is dashed just like the other one. So we know that we are definitely dealing with either this right here or this right here. We are not dealing with these guys, so I'm gonna cancel these guys out. And we already tried greater than, and that one didn't work out. So the only possible choice we can have is that y is less than. And let's change that on Desmos to see if it reflects that. We're going to go less than. Oh, look at that. It looks just like it did on our graph specifically that we have on our paper. So obviously we have found the correct one. That'll make things very easy to handle. We can move on because we've obviously got the correct answer. We are moving on to this next one, which should be on your paper. It says number 4, but it is the third problem we are working on. So right here it says, what is the slope of 2x plus 4y, make sure to write that in there, equals 8. Now, knowing based on the formula charts that I've given you, let me go ahead and get one real quick. Everyone will be allowed to have one of these formula charts. So right here we're going to go all the way to the bottom to where it says linear equations, and we have three types of linear equation forms. We have standard form, slope-intercept form, and point-slope form. Now this one right here looks like this one, which is our standard form. So obviously we can't look next to the x like we've been used to on point-slope form and slope-intercept form. We got to look at the standard form. So right here we have ax plus by is equal to c. Now there are one of two ways that we can solve this. You could know that the formula for a standard form equation to figure out the slope is m equals negative a over b to figure out our slope, which means we would have to know that this is our a, this is our b, and this is our c. And if we wanted to fill in what we see here, we would write, okay, well, m is equal to, our a has to be negative, so negative 2 over 4. Alrighty? And this right here can be broken down into a smaller fraction or a more simplified fraction. We can fit 2 into 2 one time and 2 into 4 two times, which means this simplifies into negative 1 over 2, which would find an easy answer. Or we could do this. We could do 2x plus 4y is equal to 8. And we can solve for y to get it in y equals mx plus b form, which is something that you're used to, and it'll be a lot easier to manage. So we can subtract 2x, and we're left with 4y is equal to negative 2x plus 8. Why did I do that? I did that because we are used to seeing it in y equals mx plus b form, and if I put the 2x on the side, it'll be a little harder to recognize. So I moved it, since it's negative, I moved it negative 2x, and the 8 was positive, so I can do plus 8. Now we can do the rest of it. We can divide by 4 and divide by 4. And then right here, we can do the rainbow method. I mean, not the rainbow, the heart method. Sorry about that. Which helps us break down this problem and make it a little easier to manage. So we have y equals, since these guys canceled out, just like these guys canceled, we have y equals negative 2 over 4. Well, we talked about that a little earlier. Is the same thing as negative 1/2, so we're going to break it down to negative 1/2 x. And then 8 divided by 4 is equal to 2. So we can just write plus 2 right here. Plus 2. And since this is in y equals mx plus b form, and this is our m, we know that 1/2, negative 1/2 has to be our slope. So we did it correctly both ways. This should be a lot easier to manage. Another thing you could have done, you could have plugged this into Desmos and then look for the rise and run on the line and figured out what your slope was. So there's a lot of different ways you can solve things like this, which makes solving this a little easier to manage, because to each his own, and whatever you prefer, as long as it's the right way, it should work out for you. And then let's go on to the next problem, which shows us a cell phone company charges a service fee of $80 plus $5 for each gigabyte of data. Angela wrote an equation using T for total cost of service as a function of G, the number of gigabytes used. What is the value of the slope in her equation, and what does it represent? So the first thing we want to write down, make sure you have written these numbers down so you know exactly what you're referring to. Angela wrote T as the total cost. Most of the time total cost is going to be our Y, so keep that in mind. So we have T equals, and then it says as a function of G, the number of gigabytes. Now we don't know how many gigabytes Angela has, so we're still going to leave it as $5 per gigabyte. And then the cell phone company charges a service fee of $80. So plus 80. Now we can rewrite this a little easier for us to understand in letters or symbols that we understand a little better. So we can change this T, we know that it's our Y, and we can change this G into our X. So we can write it as 5X plus 80. Now we're in a form that we understand. We're in Y equals mx plus b. So we know that our b is 80 and our m is 5, and then obviously our y is y. So it's a lot easier to understand what each thing is now. Everything is lined up to where we can understand it a little better. And it says, what is the value of the slope in this equation? Now the slope is m, and m so far has been 5 on all of them. So we know our answer has to have 5 in it. So we can cross out b, and we can cross out d. Those aren't going to help us. And then next, we're looking for what it represents. Well, if it says plus 5 for each gigabyte of data, then we need to find something that says something that represents the per hour charge. Now in this one we're not doing per hour. This is a little left over from what the problem used to be. So you're going to change this per hour right here. You're going to cross it out. Make sure you cross it out. And we're going to change the per hour into per gigabyte. Of service. And instead of service, we're going to change that to data. Okay? So once you change that to gigabyte of data, then it makes sense, because the service charge fee is what they charge the $80 with, so that can't be it. And that should have been $80, and right here it's showing us 5. If we change this to gigabyte and data, then it makes a lot more sense. And I apologize for leaving that. I kind of had a little brain fart there, and I forgot to replace that when I changed the problem a bit. So we have gigabyte and data. So the slope 5 represents the charge per gigabyte of data. Now it makes a lot more sense. And this is the correct answer right here. So make sure that your paper has gigabyte and data, so we know that you saw this video and you changed what should have been gigabyte and data instead of hour and service.